so that we can have this for posterity, and so you can go back and remind yourself of things. Yeah, so we'll kind of take a look at that discussion thing in a couple minutes. Let's see, how many people do we have in right now? We've got 12. Right. Yeah, so it's and let me.
I'm on the. Sorry, I got someone bugging me to tell me I'm supposed to be in class, and I'm in class. Thank you. I'm gonna have to move my classroom to another room.
I'm kind of taking role here. The great thing about this is that I don't have to call out names. I can just there's Ellie. Okay. Let's see. I tend to talk to myself while I do this, so just bear with me. Okay, so questions about the discussion. So let me bring up the screen here. And let me fix this so that I'll switch to a student view so you can see it the way you would see it, not the way I would see it. So if we come down to the discussion, I've got the question listed here, but if you click on this link, discussion question, actually now you can't, I'm going to have to go out of, because I'm not in a group. Move this out of my way for a minute. Turn to my normal role. You'll see a thing, you'll only see one. It'll say reply here, do not start a new discussion. You click on that. And then again, I've got the question so that you know what you're replying to. And you will, let me move us out of the way for a moment. You'll hit the button that says reply. And you'll write in that box there. So this is just to give you a chance to see how how we might go about diagnosing somebody with a substance use disorder, and to see the severity of the disorder. Again, to try to clarify some of the terminology that we're using. So we'll get that done. Before we get into the class, just a little poll here. So what is your favorite season? And you can click on whatever your favorite season is. and we will see what. Okay, so we have almost everybody voted. Okay, so I am going to end the poll. And here are the results. I am actually surprised. My favorite season is fall or autumn. And I'm actually surprised that four people agreed with me. I'm really surprised that 2 people have winter as their favorite season. So it's interesting to me because autumn to me always feels like, to me, it's the beginning of the year, and it's like the start of the whole cycle. So glad to know that other people feel that way. How are people doing with getting the textbooks? Everybody have the Van Wormer yet, or are people still waiting for that one?
I'm still waiting
Still
for
waiting.
both of my books.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, yeah. And I'm still having some difficulty with Cengage getting information. What I'm hoping to do in the next day or so is to post the chapters from my book, because I think that one's going to take probably longer to come in than the Van Wormer book. The Van Wormer book, I've got the PowerPoints, but they're not as informative as I would like. So I'm trying to find something that Cengage has that, and obviously they are reluctant to put out too much material without getting money. So, they don't want to give out so much material that people won't buy the book. So that's the problem I'm running into with them, but I'm going to continue to see what we can do. But I was, yesterday I did a video for my online class, and I realized that the PowerPoint that I shared for my book really covers a lot of important stuff. So I'm going to bring that PowerPoint up and we're going to go through it together. And it particularly talks about the whole diagnostic criteria. So we want to do a slideshow from the beginning. Okay, let me just stop the share for, let me pause the share, okay. Let me stop the share, because what I need, okay. Thought I heard somebody come in, but I guess not. All right. Let's see, so we'll go back to here. And I want to talk a little bit about the disease concept. And I know from reading the papers that it's one of those things that some people will totally buy into, some people will totally reject, and some people are kind of, sure, why not? The whole idea of addiction as a disease has really been around for a long time. In the 1700s, a doctor named Benjamin Rush wrote a pamphlet where he talked about addiction, which back then was primarily alcoholism, uh, and talked of it as a disease. So that was the first time you had that happen. But during the late 1800s into the early 1900s, you had the prohibition movement building, and people were beginning to talk of addiction as being, as the substance alcohol being the cause of addiction and the cause of a lot of ills in society. And there was a call to outlaw alcohol, which indeed did happen. So when the Depression hit in 1920s, 1929, when the Depression started, the government needed money. People were out of work, so therefore they weren't paying taxes. The government needed money to try to put people back to work. And they realized that one way to make money would be to tax alcohol, but alcohol was illegal. So you had the movement to repeal prohibition, but you had to justify it. If you had said that alcohol was this evil substance that destroyed people's lives, how do you justify making it legal again? So that's when people again began to talk about alcoholism and addiction as a disease, because the disease causes a certain number of people to have problems. Most people can drink and not have problems, but let's say 10% of the population has this problem. So you don't deny 90% because of the 10%, and you treat the 10% who have this disease. So that's where the disease concept really began taking root. It is at the root of the 12-step approach, and the whole addiction treatment field really grew out of the 12-step movement. William, I advanced the slide by mistake, but there's a writer named William White who back, I think in about 1999, wrote an article called A Disease Concept for the 21st Century. And he suggested that the whole idea of addiction as a disease is really a metaphor. It is like a disease. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. So how do you determine that somebody has a problem? And for decades, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is the guideline for diagnosing any kind of mental health disorder, had two levels of problems. They had substance abuse and substance dependence. There were 4 criteria for abuse. There were 7 for dependence. Abuse was considered not as severe and dependence more severe. The problem was that people who were diagnosed with either tended to get the same amount of treatment. And it would be like somebody who has slightly elevated blood sugar being put on insulin. It's too much treatment for too small a problem. And when you overtreat addiction, the problem is that people have a difficulty dealing with that so-called diagnosis and, treated like they have a major problem when they have a minor one. And as a result, they can sort of tune out of treatment. So you want to make sure people are getting the proper level. In 2013, the DSM is a book that over the decades gets updated, and for good reason. I think it was as recently as a DSM-3, homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder. So you can see there are reasons to change and update the DSM as we have better understanding of human interactions and human development. So in the latest one, they went from abuse to dependence to what they call substance use disorder. And it lists 3 levels of severity. And here are the criteria that are being used. Any questions so far? If you do have a question, right now when we're in share screen mode, I can't see everybody. So if you have a question, just unmute yourself and call attention, because I don't want to miss anybody who has a question or even observation to make. So if we look here, one of the criteria is use resulting in failure to meet obligations. It's interfering with work, family, home, school. Second is use in situations that are physically hazardous. Most obviously would be drinking and driving, but using heavy machinery under the influence, things along that line. Use despite recurrent social or interpersonal problems. Your use is causing you problems at work, it's causing you problems at home, but you continue to do it. Tolerance. Tolerance is basically your system adapts to having the substance. So now you need more of the substance to get the same feeling. You know, if you have never had alcohol before, that first drink you have, after that first drink, you're starting to feel pretty good. After you build tolerance, it might take 2 or 3 drinks to get that feeling. I've seen people get to the place where I worked with one person who was drinking basically a case of beer a day. And you couldn't tell by his behavior.
That's a lot of beer.
That's a lot of beer. And he was a truck driver.
Hopefully it was like Bud Light or something and not some like...
Yeah, but his tolerance had built to that point. Yeah. Withdrawal is another symptom. And we're all familiar with, you know, withdrawal symptom from opiates. You start to get chills and aches and pains and diarrhea and all that type of thing. People who are withdrawing from alcohol can get shakes and tremors and start to have hallucinations. Interestingly, withdrawal from alcohol can actually be fatal. And a lot of people don't know that. I didn't when my brother quit drinking, and it was just luck that he did not go into seizures when he quit, because he just abruptly stopped on his own.
That's why for the longest time, like jails and institutions, when you would go in, they wouldn't help you for opiate withdrawal, but they would for alcohol withdrawal.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That was the worst.
That's why they used to go into jail and say that they're alcoholics. They give them the drugs.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the only way to get Librium.
Yep. I know the whole deal.
You could withdraw from benzos too, right? Like die
Absolutely.
from benzos for withdrawal?
Benzos.
Yeah.
Yeah, benzos and alcohol, they work on the same parts of the brain. And
Xanax
that's
is the
why they
worst.
use benzodiazepines to help people withdraw, to taper off of alcohol.
Right.
Mhm.
So, yeah. Another symptom is that substance is taken in larger amounts or used over a longer period. A lot of time obtaining, using, recovering from the substance. Important activities reduced or given up to use. No, I'm not going to go to my kids' play because I need to stay home and shoot up. Important activities don't, yeah. Use despite knowledge of a physical or psychological problem. People who suffer from depression and are drinking, which is a depressant. People who have heart disease and are using lots of cocaine. You know, not smart things, but you see
No.
people do it all the time. And then
Well, of
finally,
course.
craving or a strong desire to use.
Things
So-
that are not compatible with your body and like health conditions you have, like stuff like that.
Well,
Absolutely.
look at the people that smoke even after they have lung cancer or like the hole in their neck, and they'll be smoking
Yeah,
through that.
yeah. Well, you know, and people,
I'm guilty. I
Yeah.
smoke cigarettes and I have a lung tumor.
okay, yeah.
Ugh.
People will get to that point where they say, well, it's too late now, so why
Yeah, too
stop?
late.
You know,
Yeah.
which is an unfortunate mindset. But so if a person has 2 or 3 of these symptoms, we would diagnose them as having a mild substance use disorder. 4 to 5, it would be moderate, and 6 or more would be considered severe. So obviously the treatment that you would use for somebody with a severe disorder might be very different from that you use with somebody who has a mild disorder. And interestingly, I have worked with people who were on Suboxone for opiate disorders that would actually fall into the mild category.
Well, yeah, because you're addicted to it because there's withdrawal from it. You're
Yeah,
dependent.
they've got the withdrawal, they've got the tolerance, but they haven't failed to meet obligations. You know, they haven't been using, and you know, so it's very interesting. But there are certain drugs where, you know, if somebody is using marijuana, we're less likely to think they might have a substance use disorder as opposed to somebody who's using opiates. Because, you know, their drugs are seen differently, and yet they're both Schedule I drugs, which
Well,
the
they're-
government says are the most dangerous drugs that have no medical use. Go figure.
Well, they have medical use now.
Well, yeah. So the important thing to understand is how drugs interact with the brain. And all psychoactive drugs, all drugs that affect the brain and affect your mood and your feeling, and these are the ones that are drugs of abuse. You know, if the drug isn't giving you a feeling, you're not really going to get attached to it. But all these psychoactive drugs of abuse mimic natural brain chemicals called transmitters. As a person begins to flood the brain with these chemicals from outside, the brain tries to adapt. So if the brain starts saying, I've got too much of this substance here, I need to cut back production. I need to stop production. I've got too much. If you then stop taking that drug, it's going to take time for your brain to adapt. And the process of trying to stay in balance is called homeostasis. When you stop that drug and the brain is trying to get back to homeostasis, it's a period that people call post-acute withdrawal. It's not that withdrawal where you got the shakes and things like that, but it's the period where your mood is affected, your motivation is affected. If you've been taking depressants, you're probably going to feel overly anxious.
Yeah.
If
It's like
you've
6
been
months to a
taking
year.
stimulants, you're probably going to feel overly depressed.
And also, I think for some people, if they were using to, you know, kind of suppress negative feelings that come up with, you know, their past or traumatic situations, I feel like for a lot of people, it's kind of like the clouds start to clear at this part, and like,
Mhm.
you know, they start to get those traumatic memories back, and then I feel like that makes it easier for them to go back and start using again, because it's
Very easy during
Absolutely.
that time.
Yeah,
That's when all the-
because, yeah, Go ahead.
That's when all the remorse and guilt for, like, as long as you're more like a normal human being and actually have you know, feel bad for the things that you've done. Like when you're on the opiates, you really don't feel bad because you're kind of like,
No,
you know, it's
No.
numbing everything. But like once all the chemicals are gone and your morals come back, I mean, yeah.
you start to remember.
I personally think it's like more than that though too. Like if you're self-medicating and like there's trauma involved, a lot of times during that period, that's when the vivid like flashbacks and the trauma really surface that's been numbed and stuffed for so long.
yeah.
Like panic attacks, remembering very, very like severely traumatic situations that
Right.
people might be
I have
using
a
to forget about.
I have a question for everyone. It's kind of personal, but is anyone
Sure.
in recovery, like active recovery right
I
now?
am.
I'm in long
Okay.
recovery.
I mean,
I got a
I-
year.
I got a year as well. So it's
Congrats!
wonderful to hear.
Celebrated.
Yeah, congratulations, y'all. It's great to hear that.
I have
Yeah.
like 9 years, but do you
That's
consider like,
awesome.
yeah, but
That's
I also got my medical marijuana card, but like, so, but I only used it for like the reasons I used it for, you know. I don't know, like
Right.
if that,
I view
I
it
don't-
differently, It's
Yeah,
like
that's totally
you
different,
said.
bro. We're in a legal state. Let's be real.
right?
yeah,
You know what I mean?
I
yeah,
subscribe to the school of thought that if it's medically prescribed and you take it as prescribed, that it's okay.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
if you
like-
get a
well-
surgery and you need some help with the
Yeah.
healing
Well,
process stuff, as long as
well,
you're
it's like
taking it
with
correctly.
I think it's
I
like
take
with something,
Suboxone,
like if it's
you know?
not
Yep.
affecting your life and your like day to day, then like it's not really a problem.
Okay.
that's how I'd feel about it.
yeah.
As long
Yeah.
as you're not hurting somebody else or hurting yourself, or if it's, I mean, if you're doing it to the point where it's affecting yourself,
It's starting
Also-
to interfere with your life. Yeah.
and if you're in your life, then that's different. But
Right, right.
Everything in moderation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you know, I think that this is, you know, this is the thing to understand, is that the addiction field is constantly changing.
yep,
And I think our thinking has to constantly change. And the old, and we'll be talking about this, time permitting, today, the old school thinking of all or nothing, I don't think absolutely holds. And I think that in a lot of cases, if you've got somebody who has stopped using opiates and has marijuana now and then,
it's a lot better.
you know, do you want to, you know, it's kind of like if it's not broke, don't fix it type
Wasn't
thing.
there like a
If it's
study done
working
that
for the
showed that we
person,
helped?
Right. You know, obviously, if the person finds that the marijuana is starting to take over, then
Yes, that'd be
you
different.
rethink it. But, and I think that this is really important as you work with clients to look at that individual and say, what's working for this person? And it's one reason why I always tended to do treatment as individual treatment rather than group treatment. Because if you're doing groups, then you have to kind of create group norms that accommodate most people in the group, but it leaves some people out.
There's other unconventional things that have worked for people that I know, but I mean, I was gonna,
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah, and
Not-
we'll be getting into all that as the
Yeah.
semester goes on. But, I think this is great discussion to have. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides, but my approach to treatment, the positive path recovery approach, really is nothing new. It's just a blending of a lot of things. It takes parts of the 12 steps, part of cognitive behavioral therapy, reality therapy, family systems, a lot of motivational interviewing, which we'll talk a lot about later in the semester. Motivational interviewing is probably one of the most important parts of modern addiction treatment because it recognizes the stages of change, recognizes that people coming into treatment are not necessarily ready to change.
well, that's
And
the whole key.
Our
They're not gonna change.
Our primary goal when a person comes into treatment is to move them towards being ready to change.
Yep.
And we won't
It's
be
all about
working with
mindset.
them on changing, depending on the person, sometimes for months. But
You have to constantly keep on giving them more chances. Like, even if it takes
Yeah.
them 20 times before they get it, like I didn't get it my first 20 tries. It's just
right.
when I was ready, I was ready.
No one gets it their first try.
Yeah.
Yeah, the person has to come to that conclusion on their own, I think, because
Yeah.
I feel like if they don't, then they're feeling like controlled and like, you're just being, it gets to a point where you're really, really, you can get a little resentful even, and you really need to like kind of feel like you're the one who's choosing to do that. I feel like.
Yeah.
Right. You can't be
Exactly.
doing it. You can't be doing it for your wife or for your parents or for
I
whoever.
was
Like,
just that.
Yeah. It's
You
it's
can't
gotta
do it for
be
anybody else. You have to literally get to
gotta
the
be
point
for
where you're
yourself.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think doing it for somebody else can get a person into treatment where you can start to get them to motivate to do it for themselves.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
But absolutely, until you get to the place where you say, I can't continue to live like this, that things start to change.
Right.
Sometimes it takes
you
an
know,
outside perspective
yeah.
too,
And it's an interesting thing. Again, we have a number of people here in class who are in recovery. I am not in recovery. And a lot of people would say, well, if you're not in recovery, how can you treat people who have addiction if you've not been addicted?
You're educated.
Well, educated is part of it, but I think
It's
the
a lot
important-
easier. It's a lot easier to connect to somebody who's gone through it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you make it more easier for them to listen and be like, okay, they got through to the other side
Mhm.
versus just
Yeah.
education alone. But it doesn't diminish just education.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
Like
and
a
I,
lot of
I
people have
think
family
that,
members.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, or a lot of people like have family members or like experiences with people in their life,
Mhm.
and that has taught them more about it like firsthand. But also, you know, just education isn't
Yeah,
like,
and you know, in my case, that's a big part of it. I've lost just about all my family members, my immediate family, parents and siblings, to the disease of alcoholism. So I have not gone through it, but I watched what they went through. But I think the other important thing is empathy.
Yes.
Exactly.
Able to put
Empathy
yourself in the
is
other person's place and to come from it not without judgment. And I think that's the important thing. And I think that's why people feel safer with people who have been through it, because they feel they won't be judged. Yet I have worked with a number of counselors in recovery who are more judgmental than I am.
I've experienced that more. Like people with long-term recovery can sometimes be much more judgmental of a newcomer. And a lot of times too, it's like they just never got to that. It's still a yet for them. So they don't understand how come they were able to be an alcoholic or an addict and never did any of that. So they think lesser of the ones that did.
right.
Yeah,
Like they
yeah,
forget their use.
Right.
And also,
Or
Yeah.
they never got to that point.
I think like also sometimes people who, you know, have addiction or, you know, struggle with it, it's like you can start to like project your own insecurities about things or your own feelings onto somebody else without meaning to.
Oh,
Like it's
yeah.
not really a them issue, it's your feel what they're saying is bringing out feelings in you about your
Yeah.
own path. So I think sometimes for some people, you know, that can be an issue.
it's your
Oh,
circle of
absolutely.
influence. That's what I call it, the circle of influence. The people you surround yourself with really have it alters your perspective.
Dramatic impact.
It reminds you of
Dramatic.
things that were happening to you, and then it's like
Right.
you can get
Right.
because you
I don't want to deal with that, so I don't want to hear it from you.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and it's very easy sometimes to forget where you've been. You know, and that's something that I think is very difficult. I worked at a program. If you've ever watched The Wire
I need to watch it.
or The Corner, which takes place in Baltimore, I worked in a clinic that was right in that area where those shows take place. And most of my clients that I worked with were poor African American people, and they would walk in, and I'd be sitting there in my bow tie, and they would kind of look at me and think, well, what does this guy know about my life? And they would be shocked as we began to talk to find out that I grew up in the projects of Baltimore. You know, I eventually moved myself forward in life, but I've not forgotten where I came from. And, you know, I think, again, that whole idea of empathy and letting people know that you are not judging them for where they're at. And once people feel safe, it doesn't matter whether you've been there or not. They understand that you will hear what they have to say and not judge.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes that is difficult. I almost had a very high profile child molester as a client. And I had to really ask myself, can I get to a place with him where I can put aside judgment and work with him?
That'd be tough for me.
And I
Were
think
you able to?
I think I was able to get to that place. However, his probation officer decided I wasn't the right person. And I understand that because it's not my specialty. He wanted to come to me largely because he lived a block away. But,
Oof, that makes it that makes it even better.
yeah, and I also knew that, because he was, everybody in the community, of course, knew he was there.
Yeah.
And, he was under constant scrutiny. And I knew I would have been under constant scrutiny with him coming into my office each week. But, it was one of those things I decided, yes, I think I can do this.
Well,
but, it's tough.
Well, the whole thing is like, I mean, I would have trouble being a counselor or somebody like that too. But look at like all the lawyers that have to defend them. Like, it's just part of the job, I guess. You have to separate the job from your personal feelings.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that my job would not have been to help him justify his behaviors.
No, it help him
But
get
my
better.
job would be to help him to change his behaviors.
But
Right,
still, like,
rehabilitate.
Not like
And yeah,
people that.
I don't believe in pedophiles being able to be rehabilitated. I really don't. I think it comes down to a mental health disorder or something along the lines, and there really isn't. I'm not saying they can't get better, but they're still going to be that person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it comes down to not harming people, getting to a place where you're not harming
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah,
I
put him in
think,
jail.
though, I think though that whole like argument, I mean, and people can sit there and debate it all day, but it really comes down to who am I to say that as an addict, I can't recover and change my way of thinking and get better through the right therapy and regimen, but that somebody who has that type of mental illness can't do the same.
It's forever, I think. Like, I don't think it's
Yeah.
really-
And that's a different class. So
Yeah. I don't think you compare it at drug addiction to child molesters either, though. Like one,
yeah.
I look at it as they're both just different mental disorders. That's just how I
Yeah,
personally
yeah.
look at it. And I mean, I am a trauma survivor, but that's just
Mhm.
how I choose to view it. I feel
Yeah.
that everybody who is willing to put the work in is worthy of attempting to try to help.
Exactly. So and we'll move on from that because that, as I say, that is a
that's a
different
subject.
class. But
It's touchy.
yeah.
It's a touchy subject too. Yeah.
So the Van Wormer textbook is called Addiction Treatment: A Strengths Perspective. And in the book, they talk about the difference between the traditional counseling approach and the strength-based therapy approach. And on page 21, for those of you who do have the book, they have a really nice chart that goes over some of the differences, and I want to talk about a couple of them. The traditional approach looks to the individual for specific causes of the disease and kind of dichotomizes the reality. You got the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. The strength-based approach recognizes that there can be multiple interactive levels of influence in a person's addiction, in their disease. So it's not just that they have a genetic predisposition, but they've had perhaps traumas, they have had social influences that all combine to get the person to where they're at. And it also, again, recognizes that continuum of addiction,
Oh,
that it's not gray, black and white. There are all
How did
these
I
different
lose-
levels.
great. There it is. All right, I lost it for a second there.
Okay. Psychologically, the traditional approach has always been problem focused. The strength based is really solution focused. You're not looking at addiction, you're looking at recovery.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what did you said before strength-based, what was the other approach you called? What did
The
you call it?
traditional counseling approach.
Traditional, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. The traditional model kind of really depend on labels. The strength-based approach tries to avoid use of negative labels. I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I used to go to trainings and conferences years ago, and a speaker would get up and say, I'm an alcoholic, and I've been in recovery for 20 years. Now, that same person is more likely to get up and say, I am a person in long-term recovery. And I like that, because to me, when you hold on to that label, you're holding on to the past, you're allowing that substance to continue to have control over you.
You're letting it define you.
Right.
Right, that negative stigma.
Yeah. My last cigarette was 30 some years ago.
Congratulations.
I don't go up to people and say, hi, I'm Gary and I'm a smoker. Yeah, I'm not a smoker. I haven't been for 30 years. So before I did this, I spent 20 years working in disability services for transportation. And working in that field, when I first started, we talked about working with the handicapped. And after a while, people said, no, we don't like that term. And there's a reason for that. Have you ever thought about where the term handicapped comes from? It's the idea of somebody having a cap in their hand, asking for help.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of a very demeaning thing. So we started talking about we're working with the disabled.
Yeah, ableism is really, really pervasive. I have invisible disabilities, and it's really like, it comes down to framing people who have these, health conditions as victims. And
Right.
also there's another trope of disabled people as lazy. And that's the reason that we don't have the same productivity levels, can't, work the same jobs, whatever level
Right.
of health condition you have. And that completely negates that person's, experiences, because it's like, that's not why
Right,
they're just
right.
different,
Yeah. So after a while, people said, no, I am not disabled. I am a person with a disability. That disability does not define me. I am a person first. And that's why I love this new recovery movement where people identify as a person in recovery. You're putting the person first. The recovery doesn't define you. And I also like it because it focuses on who I am and who I am becoming, and not who I was. And I think that that's an important part of the whole process is becoming who you want to be, not who you were. In the old way of thinking, the focus was to prevent relapse. The new way of thinking is to focus on maintaining recovery. The old way uses confrontation to elicit change. The new way rolls with resistance and redefines resistance as challenge. So, you know, when we start talking about motivational interviewing later this semester, I will share some experiences I had with people who wanted to do the old school, get in somebody's face and yell at them to wake them up versus
The intervention.
yeah, right. Versus trying to allow the person to become honest with themselves, to lead the person into understanding. So this new model is not really inconsistent with the old model, but it is different. And there are people who do have trouble adapting. And you will find, for those of you who go into the addiction treatment field, you will find that you will work with people, including some people who might be in charge of the programs you work for, who still have this old traditional way of looking at things and will sometimes challenge the way you look at things. And it can be difficult. It was easier for me because I got into this later in life. So I am still closer in age to people who have a lot of these traditional values. As a young person coming across somebody with authority and age, it can be more difficult to stand up to them.
They don't take you as seriously.
Yeah. And, you know, so, you know, that can be a problem. The other thing that chapter 1 talks about is harm reduction. And harm reduction is one of those things that 20 years ago, if I walked into a program and used the words harm reduction, I might find myself out of work. If you went into a gathering of people in the treatment field, and maybe even into a gathering of people in recovery, and said harm reduction, you might be ostracized.
I think,
However,
like kind of stuck in this view that like it's enabling because they're not really, because they have personal, you know, beliefs or experiences that kind of make it harder for them to see the nuance of it because
right.
It's not so simple as we're going to let people go back to the substance they're addicted, you know, like it's not really like that.
Right. Yeah, and it really can be a difficult thing. But the whole opiate epidemic, if there's an upside to it, is that for one, people have begun to recognize that harm reduction beats the hell out of dying children. You can't help a dead person recover. So if we can keep a person healthier and alive, we have more chances to bring them to a point of recovery. And if you've ever talked to somebody who works in a needle exchange program, you'll know that when people are coming to get the clean needles, people are checking in with them on their health. They're talking to them about the options that are available to them. They are offering a way into treatment every time they meet with that person. And you would not have that opportunity to do so if you weren't offering that place for them to come to get the clean needles. You're also helping to prevent diseases like hepatitis, AIDS, HIV, and the rates of those bloodborne diseases greatly increased with the opiate epidemic. Even the whole idea of medication-assisted treatment. 11 years ago, when I opened my office here in Ware, and by the way, this studio that I work from, that's now my music studio, is in the same spot that my counseling practice was for 11 years. But 11 years ago, when I opened my office, some people were upset that there was an addiction place in town. A few years later, when Right Choice decided to open a Suboxone program down the street from me, the town was overjoyed because there were so many people who needed that treatment and needed it locally. So, yeah.
I live in Holyoke, and I don't know if anyone knew about this, but last year, about a year ago now, we were voting on I don't remember what question was, but it was a question about Yale Street in Holyoke, which, if you don't know what Holyoke is it's basically there's the Highlands, which is kind of where the more upper class people live, and they can be very, very judgmental and snotty about the poorer population, the Puerto Rican population, the Black population, because racism and classism, all those things. But basically, they were trying to open up a group home for
halfway house, basically.
Yeah, and I live in a section of town where everywhere I was seeing no on Yale signs, and as somebody who has mental illness, has been in recovery for, addiction issues before, that really irked me. I was so upset by that, because it was really, they were saying that they thought addicts were going to come harm their children. I was
associate addiction with crime.
It's
sad,
what?
But
I have
you can't
no
associate
my whole
recovery
life
with crime,
Right. They don't, it's not like they're bad people. It's not like we're bad people, it just really upset me. I was like, I don't want to live in a neighborhood where people think that.
Yeah. And it's so, and it goes back to that whole stigma issue. And, I think finding ways to remove that stigma is really important. But it always interested me. I would have clients come to me and they say, well, I'm in Ware. And
Where?
people say, yes. We always got to get that joke in somewhere.
I know, that's like a cheesy joke, sorry.
I know. I get that a lot from people. But I would have people come into my office new in recovery, and they'd say, well, are there some meetings in Belchertown and, surrounding towns I can go to?
Nope.
And I'd say, well, yeah, but we've got a bunch of meetings right here in town. And they say, yeah, but I don't want people seeing me going into the meeting who know me.
Yeah, that's kind of true too, though.
And I'm saying, but they watched you go into the bars and the packaged goods store
Yeah.
all the time.
Actually,
Now you're ashamed to be seen going into a meeting.
Most of which are held in churches too.
Well, and there's that as well.
You know.
Which is, unfortunate for those people who have kind of those religious hangups.
yeah, but
But
it's more. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying it's more like acceptable for like someone to socially drink. But I guess if you were known as the town drunk and then
Mhm.
seen going into a meeting, then maybe it would be like, well, we already knew he was an alcoholic. So,
yeah,
but I mean, if you're one of those people that people didn't really know how bad your problem was,
yeah. And then I think the other thing is that, again, we talked about, that whole post-acute withdrawal period, your shame starts kicking in.
yeah.
You didn't feel shame when you were actively addicted. But as you get into early recovery, that shame starts to build. And, that whole stigma starts to catch up. So, it really is unfortunate. But as I say, the good thing is that people now are more open to the idea of harm reduction. I was very unique in that people would come to me, and I think I talked about this actually last week. Some people would come to me not wanting to totally quit, but to moderate. And I would work with them on that goal.
It works.
And usually they would come to the conclusion that it wouldn't work. But I allowed them to try and to come to that conclusion. Because if I told them when they walked in the door, no, I can't help you do that,
They'd look for somebody
they
else.
would
to
have
help
never
you
come
guys.
back, and they might have never, or not, it might have taken a lot longer for them to realize, okay, no, I'm going to have to do it.
It kind of reminds me of, yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when somebody's in counseling for depression and they're, struggle with, suicide or suicidal ideation, and like the therapist. That's why I don't like the like mandatory reporting to emergency services, because I feel like that stops so many people from getting the help they need because they don't feel safe. They feel like they can't talk about it or express not actively suicidal, but
Right.
just having thoughts about that, and they're worried. Not everyone can put their life on hold to go to the hospital for however long. People have
3
kids,
5 a
have jobs.
week.
Yeah, and
Right.
and it's scary. It's like who's gonna take care of my kids? Who's gonna tell my boss what my boss is gonna fire me for this? And I feel like it's kind of the same thing with that, like similar.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did in my practice, and I was very open with the probation officers I worked with on this. If somebody came to me and told me I relapsed, I did not notify the probation officer.
Well, wouldn't that be privileged anyway, or unless you sign a waiver?
I think so.
They'll
But
just put them back in jail, and what's that gonna do? Like jail doesn't help people.
And if
I
people,
believe in rehabilitate.
right, and if people were afraid to tell me that they slipped and they needed help, how would I know to help them? So
It
Right.
breaks
I
down
need
the
to
trust.
create that safe place and let people know it is safe to come in and tell me that you relapsed. Now, if your probation officer does a screen, I can't help you. But if you just tell me that you slipped, then we can work together to try to work this out, and I will not notify probation. In the 11 years I was in private practice, I never once felt that I had to make a report to the DCF or to anyone about somebody's behaviors, or because I never saw anything that I felt was dangerous. I saw things that needed to change, but they weren't so dangerous that I felt that they had to be reported. And I think that, and it's a fine line because, you know, you you
Well,
obviously
especially for
don't
DCF.
to put people in danger, but you also don't want to push people away and lose trust. And, you know, I had to really sometimes weigh, is this really something that is causing real danger, or is it, and, you know, I would say that, you know, in the 11 years, I never had a period where I would have said, gee, maybe I should have. You know, maybe that was luck, but you know, it is, and I understand the whole mandated reporter thing, but you know, I have seen places and people who rush to report at times when I think there really is not a clear danger, and they do lose that.
And I
that
feel
trust.
like taking people's kids away from them when it's, you know, clearly not like to the level where it's like dangerous to the children,
Mhm.
that just creates a cycle of trauma. They're never going to trust anybody who's like authority on that level again. You know what I mean?
Right,
Because
yeah, yeah,
people's children, that is very, very, it's like a line has been crossed. You took my kids away from me. Like, I'm not doing this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, and you have to ask yourself, is there enough danger, particularly when you spend a lot of time building a therapeutic relationship with somebody, you know, and I think that makes a difference too, because if you've spent that time building up that therapeutic relationship, you know that person well enough as well to know what level of danger is there. If it's somebody you're just meeting, then you have more question. But if you've been working with that person for any length of period and you have started to build that level of trust with each other, you have a much clearer idea. Yes, this is, you know, it's not ideal, but it's not dangerous.
yeah.
And let's take this time and work the person past this and
Yeah.
get this issue resolved.
And I think you can, like, at that point, you can start to see, you know, whether they genuinely are trying to move in a positive direction and a safer direction for themselves and for everyone else in their lives versus whether they're, you know, kind of enabling their own behavior, really sort of,
Right.
you know, not accepting it. And that, I feel like that's a lot more dangerous. And that is more of a situation where you should be a little more cautious versus when you can see that somebody's intention is to, you know, recover and to get to a healthier place versus like where they're still kind of like, you know, they're not able to care because they're so
Right.
addicted.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, those are the people that you're working with and trying to move them to that place where they begin to care. Interestingly, the insurance companies did not used to give you that time. Somebody walked through the door, and if they weren't changing within 2 weeks, they were wanting to cut them off.
I mean, detox is like they only want to do 5 or 6 days, and then they'd have to fight with the insurance companies to keep you there long. You know, if
Yeah.
well, it's expensive. I get it. You know, I mean,
Well, it is, but you know, and I have to say that I work with insurance companies in Maryland, and I've worked with them here in Massachusetts, and
Mass
you know,
Health is good.
I think things have changed over time, but here in Massachusetts, I don't think I ever got refused more time with clients who I felt needed more time. Uh, but of course, I was working outpatient mostly here. But I was a clinical supervisor uh, for Behavioral Health Network up until COVID hit. And even at that residential level, the insurance companies were giving us up to a year with people in residential treatment, with no threats
Really?
of shutting the person off.
A lot of halfway houses are free though up here.
Yeah. Okay, folks, so we're just about out of time, it looks like.
Yeah, can you, I didn't know what to do for that discussion or whatever, so
Yeah,
I looked at it, but
yeah. So again, let me real quick bring that up. Share the screen and yeah. So I'll kind of get. So in fact, I'll take us very back to just the weeks.
this is all new to me, so
Okay, yeah.
I figured out how to submit the essay yesterday, or
Okay.
the whatever. But
Yeah.
let me know if I did something wrong, because I think I got it submitted, but I just
Okay.
don't.
So here you've got the discussion question, and right above where I've got the question spelled out, you click on that,
Okay.
and it takes you into here. Now you're seeing 3 because I've got 3 groups. You only see 1, and that's for the
Okay.
group that you're in. And you'll click
Okay.
again where it says, please reply here. Don't start a new discussion.
Okay.
And again, here's the questions. And I got to move you over to this side of the screen for a minute. There's a button that says reply. You click that, and then you type in your response there.
All right. And
And then hit
is this due
submit.
this week? Does it do this week?
Yeah, it's due this week.
Okay.
So, and I really figured that, people wouldn't start on it until after we had our class today and were able to go over the criteria.
Yep.
So if you go into that PowerPoint for Positive Path Recovery, Chapter 1, you'll see the 11 criteria for substance use disorder. And then you'll read each little case study, and you'll make a decision what level of substance use disorder the person has, if you feel they have one. And while there might be answers that I feel are right, they may not necessarily be the answers that you feel are right. So don't worry about having the right answer. Just explain how you came up with the answer that you came up with. This one doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of replies to each person's response, but I just wanted you to kind of learn how to practically apply some of the information that we're talking about. So you guys have a good week. And I'll see you again on Tuesday, which will be the 22nd, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. See you classmates next class.
Yeah.
All right.
Everyone.
Bye.
Later.
And thank you for
Bye,
sharing.
guys.
Okay, guys.
Sorry for being late today.
Oh, that's okay. Those things do happen.
Yeah, I sent you an email. I was actually on campus picking up my laptop and hotspot.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's why I
Cool.
wasn't here last week. I couldn't log in.
Okay, fantastic.
All right, thank
I'm
you.
glad that worked out. Okay,
Hey, bye.
bye.
Okay, Gary, I know
Yeah.
everyone's leaving. Do you stay on sometimes right after, like for like is there like a like say like 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 a after class, like if I have questions or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. I mean, if people have questions or whatever, glad to. I usually will get on here about 10:30, 10:40 in before class. And then, if you have questions after class, just let me know. Yeah, I want to talk, after class and, if you have
Yeah,
questions or whatever.
here's my whole thing. Is I did a really unique way to get to the point where I'm at now, and I wouldn't advise it to the next person on how to
Yeah.
get sober. So like that's why
Mhm.
I'm. But like there is like literally no one fit thing that fit, because there was a time where, like I had PTSD from all the prison time that I did,
Mhm.
and nothing would treat it. And you know what ended up working was like microdoses with like plant,
Mhm.
and only did it a few times, but it like was it allowed, like mushrooms or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like ever promote that as something, but I'm actually a strong believer now in it because it actually like almost cured PTSD.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the earlier 60s, at Spring Grove Hospital in Baltimore, where I grew up, they were doing experiments with LSD as a treatment for alcoholism.
Right, it works. I've seen
And
like,
yeah. And actually, these types of studies are happening again.
well, I'm hoping they do because I've seen, like, I have a friend that was, a junkie for years, and one trip, and then all of a sudden changed his whole life. Like, and the
Yeah.
people that have gone down, done the ayahuasca retreats and had like life-changing, experiences. And like so I think there's other paths, and I just don't, and I know that's like off the route, and I don't want to, and I know
Well,
that would
yeah,
be
and we have to be careful,
right.
because
Because that's
again, what worked for you may not work for everyone, and
yeah.
it's certainly not something that even as a master's level counselor, I really can't make any medication recommendations.
No, but just like how Suboxone would, can be abused, but it can
Yeah,
also be used.
right,
It's all
right.
about it's all about
Yeah,
your intentions and how you use it.
yeah. So to me, it's like when somebody comes to me and tells me, okay, well, I did microdoses and that worked. It's like, well, great. I'm glad that worked for you.
Right. That's the thing is like,
Yeah,
what works for me is definitely probably won't work for a lot of other people, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So it's kind of like not judging, but not promoting, and it's
right.
like, so, and I mean, I work for a methadone program that
Yeah.
actually had an acupuncturist on staff.
There's actually a way to there's like a detox where they actually it's some kind of plant that they give you, and it actually like takes withdrawals away, but it's also like it I forgot what it's called. I have to look up the name.
Yeah.
I never did it, but
Mhm.
supposedly they use it for
Yeah.
like detoxes for heroin addiction. I'd have to look
Yeah.
at the name again, but I never tried it, so I don't know how it works or not.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that it's good when you can come into doing this work with an open mind. And it's great to know, okay, well, this is what worked for me. And I know that it's not the traditional route.
yeah, I definitely didn't do the traditional route, but that's all right.
So,
As long as I got there, that's all that I
yeah,
cared
and
about.
it's good because when you come across somebody who isn't doing the traditional route, you're not going to say,
Mhm.
oh, you can't do it that way.
Like when I was in prison for the 5.5 years, there was plenty of drugs in there, heroin,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But that's when I just steered towards just the weed when I was in prison, and like, it worked for me. And then when I got out, got the medical card, probation was okay with it. And
Mhm.
actually now to this day, I don't even think I don't even do it daily anymore. It's just at night, like sometimes I sleep now, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, I know like going into this field, there I'm sure any job's gonna want, you know, urine screens, all that stuff, you know,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
for this field. But I just hope that the laws slowly change on some of these things, just because, you know, there are medical reasons for some of the, you know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and you know, I mean, I'm I'm that odd person. I made it through the 60s without smoking pot.
Swear.
No, I was a hippie. I was total hippie.
I can
But I
tell.
just drugs kind of scared me because of my family history.
Well, that's good. You didn't
But
miss out on anything.
well, no. But the funny thing is, I started smoking some in the 80s.
Huh.
But I for me, it just really didn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
Yeah. So it
Yeah.
was kind of like, so, you know, but so I don't know now how you know, and obviously, you know, any job that I've gone for has been kind of under the old regime,
Well,
where
what has
you
changed on a federal
absolutely would
level,
have never gotten a job with a marijuana positive, but I don't know
right?
what it is now.
No, it's got to change on a federal level
Yeah,
legally before, because
yeah,
until then they can always say it's illegal, you know, federally.
right, yeah,
Even with your
yeah,
medical card or whatever. I
right,
was surprised.
yeah,
I was actually surprised probation let me do it,
yeah,
but they didn't care. They just said as long as you have a medical card, they didn't
yeah.
care.
There you go.
Yep. All
Okay,
right.
fine. I'll see you
All right.
next week.
Yep. See you later.
Take care.